Before we get into working with blend modes, it's probably a good idea to explain them in greater detail before we start using them in our work. I'm working with a document called blendmodes.psd, which is available in your resources folder. Here I have a document with two layers. The background layer is white with a purple rectangle. The second layer has three squares, and each square is a different color. The first square is 100% black, the second square is 50% gray, and the last square is 100% white. What this will give us the ability to do is practice with the blend modes that are available in the Layers panel to better understand the different options that are available. That being said, blend modes are found everywhere inside of Photoshop, not just the Layers panel. So if you're working with a tool that supports blend modes, everything that you learn here would apply to that particular tool when working with blend modes for that tool. So what I want to talk about are how the blend modes work. Now, a blend mode is simply a way that Photoshop handles the pixel interaction between two layers. So in this case, how is Photoshop going to handle how the pixels on the top layer interact with the pixels on the bottom layer? Right now it's set to normal, so there's really no interaction. What we want to do is use these blend modes and work with that interaction. Now, if we take a look at the menu for the different blend modes, you can see there's a ton of them. We don't need to know what every single blend mode does. Now, chances are, if you've worked with blend modes, you would come in and select at random which blend mode you wanted to use until you got the results that you're happy with. But it doesn't have to be that random. If you have a general understanding of the different groups that you see here of blending modes, it'll make it a lot easier for you to pick out which blending mode you want to use. Notice the three groups I want to talk about. The darken group, and you know it's the darken group because the first blending mode option is darken. There's also the lighten group. Again, the first option is lighten. So those two are pretty easy to remember. The third type is the contrast type. It's not as straightforward as darken or lighten, but you'll notice the first option is overlay. And all of these blend modes in these three different categories have a similar behavior. Now, the algorithm that's used between the different elements in each category vary slightly, so you will have to experiment to some degree, but you'll at least have a better understanding as to what this group ultimately does. So what do they do? Let's talk about the darken group. In fact, we'll talk about multiply. The three most important blend modes that you have to remember would be multiply, screen, and overlay. So we'll start off with multiply. Multiply ignores whites, and it makes things darker. So if we take a look at the layer, we have a 100% black square, a 50% gray square, and a 100% white square. If we set this to multiply, and multiply ignores whites, let's take a look at the result. You'll notice that the white is completely disappeared. We can't see it because it's completely ignored. Then any white values in that gray box are ignored, making the pixels underneath that element appear darker. That's why this group is called the darken group. The next blend mode that I want to talk about is screen. Screen ignores blacks, and it makes things lighter. So in this case, remember, we have the three different colored squares. So if we're going to ignore blacks, the exact opposite should happen of what we see right now. And in fact, that's the case. We see our 100% white square. It can't be any brighter than 100% white. The black square is completely ignored. And then the darker values inside the gray square are ignored, making the pixels underneath them appear lighter. Finally, the last option is overlay, which is called the contrast group of blending modes here. Overlay will ignore grays, making things lighter or darker, but ultimately what it will do is increase contrast. So if we go ahead and select this option, you'll notice it's making the white area brighter, ignoring the gray area altogether, and you can't get any darker than black. So this is why it's called the contrast group. We're really adjusting the contrast. So again, blending modes are essentially the way that you can handle how layers interact with one another at a pixel level. And so the three groups that you need to remember are the darken group, the lighten group, and the contrast group. These three groups are going to give you the fundamentals in terms of how you would begin to understand how to use these different blend modes. Now, that's not to say that soft light isn't slightly different than overlay. It certainly is. You'll still have to experiment to some degree, but at least you'll come in and pick soft light and you'll understand that it is a contrast blend mode. Or you'll come in and select color dodge and you'll realize that it's a lighten blend mode. So just knowing those three blend modes and understanding the groups that they're associated with can really save you a lot of time and help you pick the right blending mode for the right situation. The final thing that I want to show you is how you can cycle through blend modes. Now, if you select overlay, that's not to say that you're going to be completely happy with that. You may want to end up selecting vivid light. Who knows what the case may be. If you want to cycle through the blend mode options in this drop-down menu in the Layers panel with a keyboard shortcut, if you have the Move tool selected in the toolbox, V is the keyboard shortcut to activate that tool. Then all you have to do is hold down the Shift key and use the plus or minus keys to move through the different blend modes. So this can save you time in terms of experimenting with what type of blend mode that you want to use for this layer. So again, this is just a general overview of how you can work with blend modes and how you can understand at least those three groups of blending modes, making them a lot more useful in your projects.